안녕하세요. Thank you for having us, and I just want to thank those who are staying. I promise you that we will end this today with a bang. So first of all, before I start, I do want to thank Chairman Che and KCCI for hosting this important event and for supporting CAPS to invite our speakers to Seoul. And it's important for us to share what our speakers, as well as other businesses around Asia, on their decarbonization commitments. And today, as Ruth has mentioned, it is within CAP's mission on this topic to talk about what are the private capital and resources are being deployed to address environmental issues and climate change. And today we're very lucky to have 3 speakers from 3 different regions and 3 different sectors to share with us on their journey. Before I start, I'll just quickly introduce them. So Allan, first we have Allan. Allan Barcena is the Assistant Vice President of Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at EDC. EDC is one of the largest renewable energy in Philippines. And he oversees the CSR program, and he is also the Executive Director of the Net Zero Carbon Alliance. And that's something I know we want to talk about a bit later. Then in the middle, we have John. John Haffner is the Deputy Director of Sustainability in Hang Lung Property. It is one of the largest real estate company in Hong Kong. And he is responsible for formulating the group-wide sustainability strategy across Hong Kong and mainland China. Then last but not least, we have Lucas Kununa, who is this Executive Officer of ANJ Group. Lucas has actually been leading the digital transformation of ANJ Group, and we'll hear a little bit more about some of the innovations from ANJ today. So before I start, I thought it's important for our speakers to share a bit more about your organization and what is your net zero commitment. So I believe first up, Allan, I believe you prepared a few slides for us.
Yeah, thank you, Gayang. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Allan Barcena from the Energy Development Corporation in the Philippines. So we are the largest producer of pure renewable energy, and we have geothermal, hydro, wind, and solar energy. So our total capacity is about 1,500 megawatt of pure renewable energy, and we account for a little bit less than half of the renewable energy source in the Philippines, which accounts for about 30 to 35%. No? And as Gayang has mentioned, we have several strategies to decarbonization and net zero. And I'd quickly mention this. So in summary, it's 3C. No? Yeah, so that's our company. Again, we are the producer of 100% renewable energy in the Philippines. So these are some of our capacities, installed capacity. And before I mention about our strategies, I'd like to mention about our mission, which is to forge collaborative pathways for a decarbonized and regenerative future. So this is an updated version of our mission, and we just crafted it in 2019. No? And it came from a realization that we need to go beyond sustainability. Sustainability simply means that we do less harm, but to us, we'd like to take it to the next level by being regenerative and commit to a decarbonized and regenerative future. That's a quote from our chairman, Mr. Piqui Lopez. He said that the word we use deliberately is collaborative, and we believe that we cannot do this alone. And if we find ourselves ahead and alone at the finish line, then we would have failed in our mission. And this is our driving force as a company. We need to engage our stakeholders, internal and external, and to be able to produce more multiple positive outcomes, not just doing less harm. So let me now go to our decarbonization strategies, which is, in summary, these are 3 C's. No? The first C is commitment to renewable energy. So we made a conscious effort and decision to invest in pure renewable energy, and not to invest in coal. And again, this came from our experience in 2013, where we were badly hit by the super typhoon Haiyan, no? In the Philippines. And we called Haiyan Yolanda, no? That's the local name. But in that super typhoon, our facilities and communities were greatly devastated. So we realized that we are really feeling the impact of climate change. And that's where our chairman decided to stick to renewable energy in 2016. And this was a public declaration. And in 2019, we updated our mission, which I mentioned earlier. No? So the first is commitment to renewable energy. The second is carbon capture. No? And we do this through our nature-based solutions, investing in forest protection and restoration with the help of our local communities and stakeholders. No? And the third C is collaboration. And you mentioned about the Net Zero Carbon Alliance. This was spearheaded by our company. It started with our renewable energy customers. No? So we were 6 in the beginning, but now we are 15. And we're glad that more companies in the Philippines are getting interested to commit to net zero. Ruth mentioned a while ago that the Philippines does not have a stated commitment to net zero. That's very unfortunate. But the private sector in the Philippines are getting more active in committing and to actually do concrete actions to decarbonize and to achieve net zero in 2050. No? So some of the members are here in the slide. No? We also have enablers. These are companies that are not committing to net zero but helping the alliance share technologies, share best practices, and helping the members to make good with their commitment to net zero.
Thank you, Allan. And next, I have John. John, can you share a little bit more about Hang Lung's net zero commitment, please?
Sure. Thank you, Gayang. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Chairman Che, for the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor and pleasure. And thanks to our new friends and colleagues. I also want to just share that I actually had first exposure to Energy Development Corporation in 2009. We did a case study at Yale University, so I've been an admirer of EDC ever since then, and it really is doing very good work in the region, so it's a small world. So our approach to net zero at Hang Lung, let me share with you first of all about Hang Lung. We develop and manage a diversified portfolio of world-class properties in multiple cities. Ruth mentioned that I spent time in China. I was just there. It's very dynamic. It's such a pleasure post-COVID to be back in a world where people are dynamic and connected again. And so I was just in a number of our cities, and things are thriving, and it's exciting. So we have high-end luxury malls with luxury brands as some of our strategic tenants. And the next 2 points in this slide, I'm going to talk about in the next slide, but they highlight aspects of sustainability. We made an ambition to become one of the most sustainable real estate companies in the world. We're also the first real estate company in Hong Kong and mainland China to receive approval from the Science Based Target Initiative for our near and long-term company-wide emissions reduction targets in line with the SBTi's net zero standard. So we think what SBTi is doing provides a very good standard for what we mean on the journey to net zero. Notwithstanding what Ruth said, that there are different pathways and there's a healthy debate, I think, about diversity, but it provides some clarity for companies around at least one international standard that we take some pride in being the first in China to have endorsement about our ambition on that trajectory. So one of the big things I think it's important to think about is around goals and ambitions. And so we set a number of targets. And if you ask me what's the most important, E, S, or G, I'll tell you my view. It's G, governance. I believe that governance is the foundation. I believe that on top of governance, you can do other things. It's a little bit like your health. If your health is taken away, you really notice it. If you don't govern well, you notice that too. So for us, governance was the foundation on top of which we could frame other ambitions and aspirations around environmental and social impact. So in October 2020, we announced the idea of annual ESG KPIs that are tied to performance targets across the company. So that gets people's attention when you have key performance indicators tied to performance. we announced a set of 2030 goals and targets in 2020, and then we announced 2025 targets to bring the trajectory to the medium term. And then we made certain commitments around net zero. And all of this involved a lot of internal discussion and debate. It wasn't just a matter, particularly for the SBTI net zero commitment, it wasn't just a matter of saying we want to do it. We had to go to our boards. We had to brief them in detail. We did a lot of analysis on different scenarios. And we are still, in some ways, to quote Chairman Lee's earlier remarks, in the fog of morning. There's still a lot we don't know in the net zero journey. But we do have the ambition we've embraced, and we know that it's something we need to do, and we have scenarios for how to move forward. So how do we approach net zero at Hang Lung? There are sort of four main pillars that I would introduce here that are important in real estate. One is energy efficiency, and I would say for many companies are leaving money on the table when it comes to energy efficiency. There's low-hanging fruit, and you can get quick wins often by pursuing energy efficiency initiatives that then provide internal confidence for some of the more challenging initiatives. So retro-commissioning, meaning calibration and adjustment of equipment, equipment replacement and upgrades, meaning actual retrofits, particularly for older buildings, and then having higher standards for new buildings. That's all under energy efficiency. For renewable energy, we're pursuing both on-site and off-site. Candidly, on-site renewables has limited potential for us. There's a lot of shading issues, a lot of the infrastructure is already built. But off-site, we're doing some interesting work, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But we're looking at all of that. And I think in real estate, it's incumbent to use all of your space in as sustainable way as you can. So even though on-site is limited, we're looking at to expand that potential. And then the use and reuse of low-carbon materials. In real estate, in the built environment, it's the embodied carbon. We heard earlier about steel. I know there's some really innovative things happening in Korea, which is exciting to hear about. Steel and concrete are a really large source of the embodied emissions in the built environment. So we want to look at low-carbon materials. We want to reuse our construction materials. And then finally, partnerships, which is a theme that other people have highlighted today. Working with multiple stakeholders. We really see this, and I know it's maybe a bit of a cliche, but it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And also, we cannot do it all alone. And so we want to work with multiple stakeholders, our suppliers, tenants, banks, universities, and so on, to accelerate progress. Because there's a lot of people looking at similar issues, so why reinvent the wheel, all of us in parallel? So those are the dimensions of how we approach net zero. In terms of achievements, under energy efficiency, I'll just give a quick example. One of our properties achieved 24% intensity reduction in 2021 compared to a 2018 baseline. And most of what it did were fairly simple measures, not very complex, quick payback measures. So again, just to illustrate, with energy efficiency, often there are things you can do that it's relatively low-hanging fruit. Renewable energy, 2 of our mainland properties are now 100% powered by renewable energy. In each case, we were the first one in its province to do this kind of transaction as a commercial complex. So we were innovating there, and we're proud of that. It's still not 100% renewable, but it's a lot more than where we were before, which was 0% or almost 0%. So it's now around 20% of our mainland electricity is powered by renewables. And we want to keep doing more power purchase agreements. And China, the market is opening up for that, which is exciting. And so we hope to pursue more. And then the use and reuse of low-carbon materials. We're partnering with a startup affiliated with Zhejiang University called Clean CO2. And they provide CO2 mineralization, which can then be, so it's a form of carbon capture, utilization, and storage in the form of recycled aggregate and low-carbon bricks. And we're doing that at our property in Hangzhou as a pilot. Now, it's not going to reduce the property's overall embodied carbon by very much, but we believe it's important to do these kinds of pilots and collaborate with startups and innovators to show proof of concept, and then to do projects can then be scaled, and we want to encourage others to look at what we're doing and say, we will also partner with others as well. And so this theme of partnerships is also important on the tenant side. So if you think of the suppliers of steel and carbon, they're upstream of our business. And if you think of our tenants, they're downstream of our business. And we announced a major exciting partnership with LVMH Group last fall to collaborate across a wide range of things around sustainability. First of its kind agreement with a charter encompassing 20 actions, including actions related to energy efficiency. So for European-based companies like LVMH, obviously after what's been happening in Europe, energy is a really central issue, but we're working on them on other things as well. And so this common charter has really been able to scale it quickly because LVMH Group's brands are in multiple of our properties at the same time. And I'll just highlight one feature that's interesting about this collaboration. It's not a green lease in the form of us saying to LVMH, you shall do ABC. What it rather is a co-creation of solutions. We're sitting together, we're working on solutions together, we're sharing data together. And if you think about it in the built environment, landlords and tenants share the same space. But traditionally, if each one has a sustainability commitment, they don't really talk to each other about how to converge on those sustainability agreements. So if I leave you with one image, it's a Venn diagram where you can look at the overlap between stakeholder commitments and ask the question, how can we achieve our common goals faster by collaborating? And we see that as really fundamental to our journey. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Lucas, as ANJ is one of the largest agriculture business in Indonesia, can you also share your organization's net zero commitments and decarbonization journey?
Thanks, Gayang. Good afternoon. My name is Lucas Kurniawan, and I'm from PT Austindo Nusantara Jaya Tbk. It is an agriculture company from Indonesia. We are listed in the Indonesian Stock Exchange. Our vision is to become a world-class agribusiness-based food company that elevates the life of people and nature. Our business segment currently is palm oil, which is the major part, and then edamame, the soybean, green soybean, sorry, and then renewable energy, and then the last one is sago starch extraction. Our operation span from Sumatra to Papua, and by comparison, Sumatra to Papua is similar size, similar distance between West Coast in the US to East Coast in the US. And then we have approximately 150,000 hectare land bank, of which 54,000 have been planted for the oil palm. And then the remaining approximately 98,000, which is approximately the size of 130%, the size of Singapore Island, have been set aside for conservation. And that is our strategy number one for our pathway to net zero, which is the conservation. And then, as we can see, we assessed with the baseline 2015, and then with the conservation, we can reduce our net zero carbon emission quite significantly. But that is not enough. So our strategy number two is to implement the technologies and also to implement 3R, reduce, reuse, recycle, which this is an overview of our business. Many people know that oil palm plantation, of course, produce crude palm oil. And then the other main product is the kernel, palm kernel. But many people don't know that we also produce, as part of our process, fiber, and then kernel shell, palm oil meal effluent, which is the liquid waste. And then all of this, we process. For example, the fiber and kernel shell, we use as the energy source to run our operation, as the energy source for our operation. And then the empty fruit bunch, together with the palm oil meal effluent, the liquid waste, we process into organic fertilizer, which then we apply as a substitute for the chemical fertilizer. And the palm oil meal effluent itself, before we process to compost, we capture the methane gas released from this meal effluent, and then this methane gas we process, we convert into electricity. We use for our internal purpose, and then the excess we supply to the national grid, to PLN, which is the national electricity company. So with the, that is the second strategy. And then the third strategy is to collaborate with the highly impacted stakeholder. Earlier I mentioned that we have 98,000 conservation area, approximately 130% of Singapore Island. And that is quite a significant challenge to take care of this conservation area. And for example, our conservation in Papua, we have approximately 22 villages surrounding this area. And so we have to collaborate with them because they are very important to take care, not to do the deforestation in our conservation area. And while we are still on the journey, I'm proud to also share with the audience today that in 2022, ANJ has been rated by Sustainalytics to be the lowest ESG risk rating in the agriculture sector. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. As you can see, we have brought to you a diverse panel, but despite the differences in their business sectors, they all have the same goal: decarbonization. And as Dr. Ruth Shapiro had mentioned, we know that we all have to be there at the end goal, but the path we get there are very different. And this earlier in this afternoon, we have heard all these different innovative technologies from Korean businesses, how to reach to net zero. And today, we'd like to bring to you that innovation have many forms. And these three speakers here actually have innovative approach and thinking towards net zero and their commitment towards decarbonization. And so with that, I want to go delve deeper into the strategies that you three presented. So first, I'll ask John, because John, Hanglong takes a very systematic approach to net zero. Can you share a little bit more why that is the case and why is it important for Hanglong?
Sure. I think I'd go back to the point about governance. I mean, we got almost 5,000 employees in multiple different locations, and so I think in terms of getting everybody moving in the same direction, it's important to take a systematic approach. The sustainability team that I lead, I'm fortunate in being able to report directly to our vice chair, so I have top management support. But my team is extremely small. We're only 7 people will be up to 10 people in a company of that size. So if we don't take a systematic approach, it's very hard to get everybody aligned and navigating in the same direction. And we want to have a sense of ownership across the company. We want to have a culture where the sustainability team is a catalyst or like an internal entrepreneur, if you like. But we want every department to share in that sense of ownership. And so for us, being systematic helps with that. And I think the other thing is, we have a lot of stakeholders that ask us for different types of information, and we need to coordinate information and data collection among multiple departments in order to be able to provide that information externally in a transparent and credible manner. So those are some reasons, perhaps, why we want to be systematic.
Great, thank you. And Lucas, back to your slides, you mentioned about circular economy. We noticed for this in Asia, circular economy, waste management, it's a really core part of many organizations' strategy. Can you explain a little bit more about A&J, why you took that route, and why and what you can what do you plan to do further with this strategy?
Yeah, so we started this journey back in 2012, and at that time it was not known at that time about the terminology of ESG, and then so-called also about the carbon emission. But we knew at that time that this methane gas release adversely impact the atmosphere. And there is a potential from this methane gas to be converted into electricity. At that time, it was we only knew about the conversion to electricity. And so we collaborate with a company from Europe and then to implement this technology. And we are the first palm oil company that and selling the electricity to the national grid under IPP, Independent Power Producer, for 15 years. And then going forward, we are going to deploy, as I briefly mentioned in the slide, we are going to deploy this initiative in all locations, but not only for the conversion to the electricity. We are also thinking to convert this methane gas captured to be the source of bio-CNG, bio-compressed natural gas, to replace the diesel fuel consumption, especially for our truck fleet.
Thank you. That's very innovative there. So Allan, I want to turn to you because your company is renewable energy. So decarbonization is top on your agenda. Now, but EDC takes a very interesting approach. You mentioned briefly the regenerative development. That's very much ingrained in your organization culture. Can you share a little bit more about this ethos?
Yeah, I mentioned about regenerative development in relation to our mission, right? So in the mission, there are 3 components of that. Number 1 is to achieve a decarbonized future. So that's very obvious and very clear. And then the second is to achieve a regenerative future. That's a little bit not too obvious. And the third one is through collaboration. So I'll go back to the idea of regeneration, which is to create multiple positive outcomes and to create enabling conditions so that these outcomes are produced over a long period of time. And this is where we work with our stakeholders, the communities, local government units, even our customers and suppliers, and even our employees. So they take part in our environmental programs. And we're not only avoiding fossil fuels or carbon emission, but we'd like to produce more positive impacts that will benefit the environment and the communities. So this is where we'd like to go. It's not easy. We're used to sustainable development as a framework, and it's not to say that's still good, but to us we'd like it to take it to the next level. It's a big challenge to EDC to actually aspire for that kind of development.
It's very admirable because you're not talking about net zero, you're talking about net positive here. So thank you for sharing that. But as you can hear, decarbonization is a very complex issue. It's not just about carbon emission. It's not about just getting that CO2 down. And with that, especially what we found at CAPS, in our project, that tackling environmental issue is multifaceted and intersectional. And I think I wanted to ask Lucas, because with ANJ, I really like your company tagline, elevating lives of people and nature. And that's very much ingrained in your company culture. And that also comes with the need of balancing of different social issues when you're designing your decarbonization strategy. Can you share a bit about how you go about in doing that, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing with in terms of balancing these needs?
Yeah, it was a very long journey, and especially when we embark the youngest project in our company, which is the project in Papua. By culture, Papua has a very different culture compared to western part of Indonesia. And so the area that we develop for the plantation in Papua is very remote. And so our challenges for the development in Papua is that while conservation is very big, we have committed on that one. The economic livelihood pressure, we have to also address that one. So we have to be innovative, and then we collaborate at the beginning, collaborate with some of the NGO to develop the program. And then, but since 2019, we started to develop the program internally. Our focus, principally, there are three focuses. One is the education. Number two is the economic livelihood, comprising, for example, the fish farming, vegetable farming, and then those products can be sold to our people in the plantation. And also we educate them to sell to the nearby city. And the number three is the healthcare, which we assist a lot for the villages surrounding our operation for the improvement in the healthcare system. And then last but not least, for such a big conservation area, it is not only maintaining the forest, but it is also very important to manage the richness of the biodiversity, and to educate the local community about the sustainable hunting, because it is part of their culture, but we educate them that the hunting should be sustainable only to fulfill their protein needs, and then also to capture the data, especially the rare species, and then we put into our database, and then also to protect the area, especially from the forest fire. That's I would say that's a very innovative in our organization, innovative process in our organization, especially for the elevating the life of people, which is the community and our employees and the nature.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And Allan, I know you work with a lot with local communities, and that's very important to you as well. Can you share a little bit more about how EDC go about balancing these needs?
Yeah, I mentioned a while ago that part of our strategy is to capture carbon through our nature-based solution, specifically through our forest protection and restoration program. The name of the program is called Binhi. That's a local name for seed. And the objective is to be able to plant and restore 10,000 hectares within our project sites and even outside our project sites. So far, we have restored around 11,000 hectares. That translate to about almost 7 million trees planted in those areas. No? And part of the learning is to partner with the local communities. Because in the beginning, we've been planting and planting, but if the communities are not involved and they don't support your projects, then they become part of the problem. So, which is why we try to organize them. We built their capacities. We did not only involve them in tree planting, but we also supported their livelihood. We provided training. And now they are our partners. They're creating social enterprises by themselves. So they're earning, and at the same time, they're now stewards of the forest, no? And less headache in our case. No? So I guess community involvement is really very important, and it's also the S in the social aspect of the sustainable development and regeneration. And we hope to continue this partnership with the local communities and to see them becoming more self-reliant and empowered, and also creating their own multiple positive outcomes in their own sphere of influence.
Sure, John?
Sorry, just maybe if I may, Allan, I just want to ask, in terms of win-win with the programs that you've got, a lot of nature-based solutions, you can be doing mitigation and adaptation at the same time. So there's a social benefit, but is that something you're also thinking about with forest reforestation and also mangroves restoration, etc.? In the Philippines is experiencing the physical effects from climate change. So do you think about it as also having the adaptation benefit?
That's correct, Jan. So it's a combination of mitigation and adaptation strategies. So basically, our forest protection and restoration, that's part of mitigation by enhancing your ecosystems to be able to withstand the impacts of climate change, and also protecting your assets and communities. But part of our strategy is also to climate-proof our facilities. So we've done a lot of retrofitting of our power plants. Even our communities and schools, we've done some improvement around structures that can withstand strong typhoons. As you know, in the Philippines, strong typhoons are very normal, right? And the patterns are getting unpredictable. No? It used to be that rainy season would be June, July, but now it's no longer. And typhoons are getting stronger. So yeah, you're correct. It's a combination of mitigation and adaptation strategies that we're doing to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change.
Great. Thank you, Allan. I think Lucas and Allan really show examples of what some of the characteristics that we found. It's working with local communities. It's also about the relationships that you're working with, because you operate in these communities and you want to make sure that you're beloved by these communities, and as well as you work slowly fostering these partnerships. So thank you for sharing these examples. Now, John, you work across Hong Kong and China. Can you share with us that what are some of the difference in terms of the needs that you need to balance across these two different markets?
Sure. So it's interesting, one might assume that, Hong Kong was developed earlier and the mainland later, and so there's a kind of simple division on that basis, but it actually doesn't necessarily turn out that way. We can innovate in some ways on the mainland more than in Hong Kong. In some ways, the opposite is true. So, for example, for renewable energy, we're able to innovate on the mainland ahead of Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong doesn't have very much renewable energy supply at all, and it's something that it really needs to work on. It's just a little bit on the rooftops, and it's talking about importing renewable energy. So we're able to do these innovations in the mainland first. Another example that might be surprising, the mainland's actually doing a pretty good job of moving forward on waste management. And I mean, there's still, everybody around the world has to move forward on circularity. We all have a long way to go. But I mean, just in terms of mandatory waste separation, the mainland wants to phase out landfill. And so our numbers in terms of a common metric in real estate is diversion from landfill. What are you doing that's not going to landfill? That number is higher for us on the mainland than in Hong Kong. And I would say, respectfully, Hong Kong is a little bit behind in terms of waste management. It's now introduced a waste charging scheme, but it could have done so much earlier. So this is an area, again, where it might surprise people. On the other hand, sustainable finance. I mean, obviously, Hong Kong is a major capital market you have a lot of international financial institutions. We've been able to do more with sustainable finance in Hong Kong than on the mainland. To what Ruth spoke about earlier, we'd like to see more engagement with sort of mainland financial institutions around sustainable finance. So it's interesting. And then in terms of the company, I mean, our CEO is always encouraging us in process improvement to come up with processes that are applicable in both jurisdictions. And we're trying to do that in general as a culture. But sometimes you can use better practice in one to point to the other and say, why don't we pick up our game on the other side? And so in that sense, sometimes when there are differences, they can be constructive differences.
Especially for, this afternoon, Chairman Lee from IPCC talked about how more investment is needed to scale up impact and actions. I want to ask, in your opinions, speakers, which area do you think in terms of the sustainable investments initiative, should businesses focus on? And John, you want to elaborate a little bit more about the sustainable investment that you've been talking about?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ideas. One is, I mean, I think there was a slide earlier that if just all the additional coal generation goes ahead, it already uses up our available carbon budget. So, I mean, the first thing is I do think there's an imminent issue around financial institutions figuring out a way as quickly as possible to move away from certain forms of fossil fuel financing and associated subsidies. I think that's a general issue that the world has to confront, because we still have our incentives are not all aligned with the challenge that we need to solve. In real estate specifically, 46% of our finance is now sustainable finance at Hong Kong. That's our debts and available facilities. But I would say that the difference, the incentive that we're provided to be sustainable is pretty modest. It's more symbolic than anything. I mean, the very, very modest adjustment in terms of cost of capital. I think it would be exciting to see more financial institutions provide companies with larger incentives where if you make steeper carbon reductions, you enjoy better cost of capital. And I think more financial institutions should offer financial instruments that are net zero aligned or carbon neutral aligned, where they really start helping with this acceleration that needs to happen. So I think, I mean, there's some data that says like the amount of finance we're doing for this transition that's needed is much less than what's actually required. But those are two thoughts that come to mind. But I know it's easier said than done, but I think in principle, those would be two things worth pursuing.
Thank you, John. Allan, what are your thoughts on sustainable investments?
Yeah, when we talk about decarbonization, there are two things. Number one is you need to be able to reduce your carbon emission as low as possible. It may not be zero, but as low as possible, you can try to reduce it. So that's one side of the equation. And the other one, whatever remains with your emission, you need to offset that. You need to remove it. Or like in the case of Microsoft, they even exceeded their target to remove some of their emissions. So they're now, carbon sequestration can be greater than your carbon emission. So when it comes to investment, I think we need to invest more on solutions, not just to reduce emission, but to remove. And when we say remove, that could be in terms of technology. Unfortunately, technologies on carbon removal are not yet readily available. If they are available, they're quite expensive. So more and more companies are going towards nature-based solutions. And when we say nature-based solutions, it's not just protecting the forest, restoring the forest, but there are a lot of ecosystems that you can enhance: mangroves, wetlands, sustainable agriculture. So I think investing in nature-based solutions should be the step in the right direction.
Okay. Great, thank you. Sounds like for ANJ, that's a natural solution for your business, given you and with your finance background. Can you share with us what are your thoughts on sustainable investments and what the focus should be?
I think in general, I agree with John and also Allan that first of all, I believe that it's very important for each company has its unique strategy. And then it should be back to the each individual company to assess what is their strategy to achieve to net zero. And then with respect to the sustainable finance, sustainable investment, the significant issue, as Allan mentioned earlier, is about the availability of effective technology to help the company to reduce the carbon. John also earlier mentioned that the incentive provided by the sustainable finance currently is very modest. For INJ, we are not looking into that incentive. For INJ, what we are looking at is that the opportunity either to increase the top line, which is to create additional revenue, for example, the conversion of biogas to become electricity, or to reduce our expense, which is the middle line. For example, the reprocessing of the waste to become organic fertilizer. And that because fertilizer represent approximately 30% of our total operating cost. And then by reduction of that fertilizer cost, that also already improve our profitability and help us to sustain this project in the future.
Thank you for sharing that. As we mentioned today, I mean, we heard that today around this cost and benefits towards this net zero. So it's interesting that in your organizations, you're managed to find these opportunities and be sustainable at the same time, and trying to move towards a low carbon operating model. I just want to pivot towards one of the common topic that we hear today, which is collaborations. And even throughout your discussion, our discussion today, you mentioned that. With Allan, I want to start with you because in some ways, EDC went above and beyond and started a net zero alliance, a net zero carbon alliance, and that's above what the your government is willing to pledge. So, can you share with us why that was important for EDC to spearhead this alliance?
Yeah, creating the Net Zero Carbon Alliance was very important to us, to EDC. We could have stopped in providing clean and renewable energy, right? And we're producing and supplying substantial amount of renewable energy in the Philippines. But we did not stop there. So it started with the idea that what if we engage our customers and try to organize them in a way that we can benefit from sharing of best practices, resources, and to have a common commitment towards net zero. And it started from there. So we engaged our customers and we had a dialogue with them and created the alliance. No? So it started as a small group of the EDC and the customers. But now it's growing, and we hope to grow in number, in influence, and in impact. So there are companies that are joining that are not customers of EDC, and we hope to see more companies in the Philippines who will join the alliance and commit to a certain decarbonization objective or goal. No? And in the alliance, what we're doing now is to come up with a common framework where we set common metrics and targets, and hopefully we can have a collective impact as an alliance. No? And this should probably set an example to other companies and even to the government to actually making a commitment. It's not really hard if you have other like-minded organizations and companies who can help you make good with that commitment and be able to support you in your journey to achieve that commitment.
Thank you. It's definitely one of the great examples of the win-win strategies that we were talking about. Lucas, so ANJ works a lot with local communities, and we've heard you explaining a bit of that. What other stakeholders that it's important to you at ANJ to work with in terms of achieving your net zero your net zero goals?
Number one, of course, government. It's very important because all the regulations to achieve net zero and also to bring all the industry players to the same level playing field, we need the government support, commitment, and then also especially consistency. And then secondly, the highly impacted stakeholder, which is community, which I explained earlier. And then the third one, the highly influential stakeholder, which is NGO. For example, in our journey to net zero, we work a lot together with the NGO. For example, those that has this expertise in the conservation, those that have the expertise in the biodiversity, and we learn a lot from them. And also at the earlier part of our experience of our journey, we also work a lot with the NGO that have the expertise in building community.
Thank you. And I think it's great that you mentioned NGO because at CAPS, of course, as you know, we advocate for businesses to look at how to work with NGOs and for the social sector. We do have a Doing Good Index that actually talks about how social sector perform across 18 economies. So I think it's really important for businesses to work with NGOs because they also need help, but they also need your resources to help them to achieve your end goal as well. With John, now I want to ask you, what about for your stakeholders? I mean, you mentioned that partnership is part of your scope 3 and working with tenants. Do you have other stakeholders that either you're working with or you want to work with as well for in Hang Lung?
Yeah, sure. So one stakeholder that I think is providing some collaboration is investors. So we are, as Ruth talked about, family-owned business. We have a majority shareholder in our company, but we're also a listed company. And institutional investors ask us good questions. And I say internally, they put positive pressure on us. I actually welcome the questions, particularly European institutional investors, but not only, where they'll say, have you thought about ABC? And I can bring that back into the company. It's a kind of collaboration, even though it's really just initiated by them reaching out to us for conversations. It's not reflected in our share price yet. We don't have investors saying, you're doing a good job in sustainability, so you see movement in the share price. But we do have that pressure coming from them, and I think it's a positive pressure because it makes it easier to do internal advocacy. If you say, look, we're getting these questions, we need to move forward on this issue. In terms of tenants, again, what we're doing at the LVMH is exciting, and I think what it represents the possibility of for us is more strongly integrating sustainability into our core business model. So you have the old idea of sustainability that might have been at the margins of a business, right? People were doing things out of a social responsibility that weren't necessarily connected to their core business. If our tenants increase, if it's another good reason for them to be in our malls that we're sustainable, well, now our source of revenue is tied also to our sustainability performance. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in real estate. I think there are a lot of major tenants that want to be in properties that are more sustainable. And so your future revenue is tied to your ability to be sustainable. So the tenant partnership is a very important piece as well. When it comes to suppliers, that's where we have more work to do. And it's challenging for us because we'll have, let's say we're doing a new large shopping mall. We have a main contractor, then that main contractor will have its suppliers. We don't traditionally talk to those suppliers directly. So you almost have to change the business model in order to be able to influence the suppliers upstream to have them providing us with lower carbon materials. And government can play a role in that too. And this is where we do have, I mean, when the central government in China and then Hong Kong made their own carbon neutrality commitments, those are very positive signals. But if we can have government working with some of these large providers of steel and concrete upstream of us, that's one area of collaboration where we would like to see more and where we think if we had that, it would be helpful. And so it's exciting earlier today to hear about the different initiatives around steel that are happening in Korea. And we're going to go back and this is a really good example of learning and comparison. Interesting to see these initiatives underway, but an area where we want to do more in terms of partnerships.
Great, thank you. And it's so great to have you three sharing with us. I know we're almost coming to an end. I wish we had another hour to talk about this. but just before we finish today, I do want to say, I think throughout today, for sure, decarbonization is complex, we know that. And it really requires forward-thinking visions and creative and innovative solutions, as well as committed actions. I think what we hear today, we can hear that sustainability is actually not the end goal. Sustainability means continue going, and when the goalpost will just continue to move until we manage to hopefully one day reach to that, we minimize that 1.50 degree. Now, so I just want to ask our speakers, can you please leave a thought and share a piece of advice on learning how can organization be or stay innovative in formulating their net zero strategy? I think I'll start with you, Allan.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with John. He mentioned about aligning your decarbonization strategy and your business strategy. So in EDC, we have done a lot of alignment. And if there's alignment between your decarbonization strategy and business strategy, then there'll be more resources, more support from your company, more innovations, and more creative solutions. And I think it's not easy, but it can be done, right? So I think that's a challenge. And then I think more companies should look into how they can actually integrate and align these two.
Thank you, Allan. And John?
Yeah, there are 4 or 5 maybe very quick insights, but sort of all interconnected. So first, I mean, top management support is critical if you want to innovate in a meaningful way, and so companies need to have that top management support. Second, I think, the expression necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, I think target setting can actually create innovation. So sometimes people think, let's build an innovative culture, then we'll go and safely set targets. It's actually the other way around. I think you have to set some ambition and then innovate with that self-imposed constraint that you've put on yourself. Third, I think data collection is absolutely critical. I mean, data. We really need to have better data, and we need better data assurance. But with data, you can then get insights, and then you need to disaggregate and aggregate that data in interesting ways to sort of notice where's the outlier in this issue that we're tackling. And then I think just be prepared to iterate a lot. That is to say, I'm going to go back to that idea of the fog of morning, because we don't know how we're going to get to 2050, but we can, and it's going to be zigging and zagging along the way. But we have to be comfortable with the idea that we're going to iterate and we're going to learn as we go. So have a culture of learning by doing, and embrace that idea that you're not going to have all the answers before you start. You're going to develop answers by starting and then innovating on various pilot initiatives and so on.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lucas.
Yeah, so I think the important start is to assess ourselves, what is our strength, and also where we need the help. And then to be innovative, we starting from this session this afternoon, we kept hearing about collaboration. I strongly believe collaboration is very important to stay innovative, because a session like this, a forum like this, where we can share to others and also learn from others, is where we can to introduce a new idea, but it's also very important whether it is relevant to our capability, or whether we need help from outside. And then other than that, I also strongly believe that to stay innovative, it is John earlier mentioned about the reporting, and then to stay innovative, I also strongly encourage that we participate in the peer review, in the platform review. For example, for agriculture, we have SPOT, Sustainability Policy Transparency Tools, or CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, or participate also in the ESG voluntary risk rating. For example, for INJ, we engage Sustainalytics. Because from this exercise, we can get a new development, new idea, and also to measure whether we are still on the par compared to our peers, or do we have to put more effort.
Thank you so much for three speakers and spending all this time and effort in preparing for our discussion today. I hope you all feel that this was a very useful discussion, and I absolutely agree with all three that this session and this whole event is very important because it's about this sharing and we're able to cross-pollinate ideas and hopefully end up even fostering some business collaborations in the future. So thank you, you three. And thank you everyone for staying behind.
네, 감사합니다.